I'm Elisa David-David. I hope everybody had a great week. This week we are learning in the Torah portion, Parashat Toldot, which the editor in me says I could find a much better title than that because Toldot means generations. And it reminds me of a comment somebody told me this week. They said to me, when you do these blogs or vlogs every week, get right to the story, like not to the story actually, the biblical part, but get right to the point of what you're trying to teach. But the whole thing is, the whole essence of the Torah is not just to walk away with just the moral lesson itself, but also those who lived through them and how they got through them. You know, we're so used to, in today's generation, going onto Facebook or onto any other social networking and seeing a meme. And we read this great little sound bite and it makes us feel good and we feel re-energized and have a new direction in life around 11 seconds. A meme, you walk away with it, you know, the quotation. And I love those things too. It's a quick access. It's like the icon to get you right into the program. But the Torah is not a meme because we're living and breathing human beings. So we need to take these little sound bites of information and expand upon them and see how we can live through them. Because life, we wish it was so easy as just following a great quotation. A stitch in time saves 9. Okay, that's wonderful, okay? You can rhyme and you can have a great inspiration from that, but it lays flat at the end of the day. Because what we really need to gather and gain from the Torah is also the people who live through these things and how they live through them and how we can gain moral growth and understanding and inspiration by the very people who lived through them. Because our forefathers, it's been thousands of years. They may be buried in the earth, their physical bodies, but their neshama and what they taught us and the lessons that they have are forevermore. So they are not yesterday's stories. The intrigue, the jealousy, the thievery, the heartache, the stress, the poverty, all the passion, all these things are included in the Torah. So if the listeners, and not just my listener, because I've heard this from many people, and they say about their own rabbis, you know, if the rabbis would just appeal to today's things, then maybe I could get interested. So perhaps the failure is either with me or with the rabbis that we're not taking those stories and breathing life into them, today's life, today's reality, today's meaning. This week's Parashat Toldot, the generations, that's how the stories continue. That's the perpetuity of Torah and of Judaism and of the mitzvot. It's not just because, okay, I get the moral lesson right now. It's because how my father did them. And my father and your father and all our fathers didn't do it by sitting in just such long, comfortable living rooms and dining rooms and able to execute every single word in the Torah with great precision and with great accuracy and with great passion. It was not so easy for them. We had ancestors who lived through the pogroms, through Egypt, through the Holocaust, through all types of hardships, all types of anti-Semitism, and they taught us the hows and the means and the ways. Just like us, they had their fears, and they had their faith, and they had their ambitions, and they had their dreams, and they had their passions. So we don't want to hear the sound bites. We want to hear really, how did you get through it? How did you do it? Give me some examples. And these are the living, breathing examples. Toldot, the generations. Tell me how my father did it. And within how my father did it was a little bit or a lot of how his father did it and his father before him, and all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moshe Rabbeinu, and all the great leaders. In this week's parasha, so we are learning about biblical characters, Esau in Hebrew, and Yitzchak and his other son Yaakov. They're just names that you say in a prayer book? No. They are human beings with stories behind them. Yitzchak cannot have children. His wife cannot have children. And he prays for her. And Hashem listens. And she finally gets pregnant. And she has a terrible pregnancy. And she's in pain. And she's wondering what it's all for and what it's all about. And she goes to inquire from God, what's going on? I'm in agony. And the rabbis teach that she didn't go directly to God himself and speak to God, but she went to the Academy of Shem and Ever to get an advice from these great, brilliant teachers. And they said to her, there are 2 nations in your womb, 2 nations, and they'll always be fighting with each other, and the younger will come to dominate over the older one. Turns out, she goes through her course of pregnancy and she gives birth to Esav and to Yaakov. Yaakov is later named in the Torah Yisrael. He's the father of the 12 tribes. The other son is Esav. Now we learn in the Torah that positive language is always used. So very rarely, and if something is said in the negative, you have to really question why. We read that Hashem says, I hate Esav, and I loved Jacob. Hashem hates Esav. Now what's so bad about Esav that Hashem hates him? I don't recall even when the story of the flood that says that God was sorry he created humanity, but I didn't see God hates. That's a big sentence from God, who's just overflowing with love and compassion. What did Esav stand for? Esav is not an ancient character that we can't relate to. Esav is a here and now character. What did he represent? Me, myself, and I. It's all about me, feeding my ego, feeding my every materialistic need, feeding all my passions and my desires. With no tempering, with no restraints. I live for now. What's the first words we hear from Esav in this week's parasha? I'm exhausted and I'm starving. Feed me, feed me. I'm exhausted. What's he so exhausted from? When you chase your own tail, when you're living a world and a life in this world, a life of materialism, a rat race, going in circles and circles and trying to catch up with your neighbor and with yourself and with your ambition and with your lusts, you're burned out, you're exhausted. He was exhausted. Now, because I'm speaking about a biblical figure, you probably think, well, Esav, he was probably 74, he was exhausted. I'm 52, I'm exhausted. Esav, when we read about him in this week's parasha, is 15 years old and he's exhausted. Now, I know a lot of teenagers and they don't run out of energy. Exhausted. What do we know about Esav? Esav was a hunter, he was a murderer, he was an adulterer. All he did was pursue passions. The first words we hear from his mouth are, I'm exhausted, feed me. And what does he do to be fed? He sells his birthright. The birthright of being the firstborn. Because having to deal with God, to do, nice things, to have to account to anything other than my animalistic needs, he wasn't interested in them. Feed me now. So who did he sell his birthright to? To his younger brother, Yaakov. And they were twins, but Yaakov came out after him. Yaakov, we learned, he had a nice voice. Why a nice voice? Because he was always speaking words of religion and faith in God and obedience, and he was a person of the tents, somebody who was content and happy, a soft spirit. They say that Esav was born ruddy. He was red and with lots of hair, and right away he was born to fight. The word used in the Torah is like dumb, like somebody who's born with red hair. They could have 2 ways to go. They can go like King David, who had red hair, and he used his passions to fight Hashem's enemies. Esav, who was also of ruddy appearance, he used his passions to serve himself at the expense of everybody else. So he sold his birthright, the responsibility of being a good person, of keeping God's divine wisdom and calling and commandments. Instead of being the Bechor, the firstborn on that subject, he sold it off for a plate of lentils. God hates Esav. He hates him. And we can't look at it like it's yesterday's story, otherwise you might accuse me of just living in the past. How many of us today are so worried about the footprints we leave behind as we go? How many of us? All we care is, give me now, oh my God, I'm starving, I need my latte, I need my this, I need my that. We're all guilty of it. Believe me, you don't want to talk to me before I have my coffee in the morning. But how much of the equation within us is serving either Esav, our animalistic spirit, or Yaakov, the voice of God, the calling of God? These are not yesterday's stories. God's Torah is forever. Forever. It's an infinite Torah. Every single mitzvah, infinite. We have to keep it forever. So what do we learn? We learn that Esav lost everything because he chose to feed only himself. He was tired, burned out. How many people do you know? You speak to them, I'm burned out. What do they do the whole day? Nothing. They're tired from serving themselves because we're so greedy. We're so needy. Very interesting. If you think about a black hole, what is a black hole? A black hole is such intense gravity. It's a gravitational pull, like selfishness, like ego, a gravitational pull. And what does a black hole do? It sucks everything in. It sucks it in with such intensity that no light can emanate from a black hole. That's science. Esav gave off no light. So there's another lesson here. You don't want to hang around with someone like an Esav, because something that's so dark, like a black hole, will pull you in, will suck you in. And even if you do have that light in you, and you have the desire to do good and be good, it will suck you in, and that light will be swallowed up by the darkness of Esav. And then there's Yaakov. His tents are illuminated with Torah and with goodness and the calling of Hashem, doing mitzvot, pursuing wonderful, beautiful things. But some of us are so tired with our own lives that we feel, I have no more energy in me for anybody else. It's just me. And this morning I spoke to my rabbi, Rabbi Ronnie Fine from Montreal, Chabad. I grew up with this rabbi. Every time I have a question on which way to pivot in life, he's the rabbi that I call. And you should check out his YouTube videos. It's the Tanya Rabbi on YouTube and on Facebook. Just amazing. And he teaches Tanya classes, brilliant. Any case, I called him for one subject and I walked away with another one. Rabbi Fine was telling me a story about Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. Rabbi Steinsaltz, if you read any of his books, you don't walk away the same. If you do, you didn't read the book. You didn't read it. Just turn pages. He was so busy and so engaged with so many projects. And when it comes to Adin Steinsaltz, you know, they were fantastic projects, big projects, projects that were pursuing Hashem. And he went to speak with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said to him, and he wanted to get rid of one of his projects because there was so much, but he didn't want to take it upon himself to be the one to decide which project he's going to lay off. So he went to speak to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who I had the great honor of meeting a few times, and I got that dollar and the Lag BaOmer coin. I went on Lag BaOmer. Anyways, whoever was blessed to meet the Rebbe, how lucky you are, and we are. And he told the Rebbe, I want to cut out something, but I want you to be the one to tell me, because if it comes from the Rebbe, at least you know you made the right choice. And the Rebbe told him, don't cut out, add on. Esav was tired. Adin Steinsaltz wanted to focus, to get it right. The Rebbe said to him, add on. And Steinsaltz expounded on this in his own understanding, because it reminded him of a scientific concept, which I later went to check after I spoke with my rabbi this morning, with my auntie, who is a very famous published scientist, just so I can get it right. So Steinsaltz said, that what the Rebbe told him to do reminded him of a scientific theory. What is that? When you try and put material into a box, you can only put so much. Push, you push, you push, you push. But it comes to a certain point, it's gate nished. You can't push anymore. But when you take it to a scientific level, on a different level, if you are trying to put atoms in a certain type of environment, a constricted environment, reaches a capacity, but when you pressurize it and you set up the conditions that the atoms are so pressurized that they actually realign themselves, reposition themselves, reaccommodate themselves so that they fit, and the fit actually creates an environment of endlessness. When you add more, but you pressurize it not with the pressure of sin that will burn you out, but when you add more and you put it in an environment of light, of Hashem, of its mitzvot, Hashem creates the conditions, both in our physical world and in the scientific world, that the walls will expand for you. The reality will expand, that you yourself will change. You will change. What's so important will become so condensed that the environment around it will accommodate it. We know from the Beit HaMikdash that when people were praying, standing up, there was no space really. It was so tight, there was really no space. Because when you're standing up, you are uniform and in ego. Gav, gava, your spine, your back, your pride, you're standing up, and there was no space. But when they bowed down, which you would think takes more space when you're bowing down, there was a spiritual expansion. There was an expansion that there was space for everyone. Because when you let go of the ego and you are humbling yourself, there's an expansion. People think that when you're humble, oh, you're diminishing, you're making myself small. No, when you humble yourself, you make yourself big. When you keep the mitzvot, you raise the world, you create more space for the goodness. We learn even when the Jewish people went to war, when you are fighting God's battles, the sun was held up for them. The sun stayed up longer just so that they could finish fighting. When you do God's work, you never run out of energy. It's not like the cell phone that your battery is dying out. When you tune into Hashem, you will have miraculous rejuvenation, miraculous direction, just like the lights of Hanukkah. Lights that were meant to last for one day, and they lasted for 8. You never get tired in the service of Hashem. I remember many years ago that I interviewed a famous Rebbitzin who was a great inspiration to me. Her name was Rebbitzin Youngrice. She started the Hineni movement in New York, and she helped people come back to God and make tshuva, a Holocaust survivor. And Rebbitzin Youngrice said, I have never taken a vacation my whole life, and I'm not tired. Because I asked her, you do so much, you're here, you're there, you're going, classes, the synagogue, everything she's doing. Always looked beautiful, kept herself respectable, modest, beautiful, a wonderful Rebbitzin. I said, don't you get tired? And she said to me, I've never gone on a vacation, and no, I don't get tired. You go on vacation when you're running from something. I am running for something. You run for something in your life. Be like Yaakov. We don't hear anywhere, and he had a very challenging life, Yaakov. We never hear that he's tired. He was the father of the 12 tribes. He had so many ups and downs in his life, we do not hear that he was tired, but he was the father of the 12 tribes. That's what he was able to create. Esav served only himself. It's time to eat. Feed me. I'm exhausted. Don't serve the Esav in you. He has a big appetite, and it won't lead you to health, to longevity in the world to come, in this world. Listen to the call of Yaakov, the voice of Jacob, the voice of Torah, the good inspiration. Those voices that are whispering in your ear to do the right thing, to be the right person, to continue the Toldot, the generations. Teach your children not just the moral lessons. It's not nice to steal. Why isn't it nice to steal? I'm stronger, you're weak, let me take it. No, it's not nice to steal. Why? Because it's written in our Torah. And who gave us that lesson in the Torah? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the Toldot, the generations. And where did they get it from? They got it from Hashem. The hands are the hands of Esav, but the voice is the voice of Yaakov. Don't stop talking. We're the Jewish people. I say not let my people go, but let my people know. Tell your children. Shabbat Shalom.